Hello, Milwaukee Bucks fans. Welcome back to yet another episode of Bucks Latest presented by Fan Arch. I'm your host, as always, Dean Simon. And before we get into everything, please make sure to leave a like, leave a comment, and also subscribe. We are still very much on the road to 1,000 subscribers, which I still can't believe it's happening this quick, but we are about to actually cross the 870 subscriber plateau. So thank you to everyone that's done that so far. But if you guys can go and press that big red button down below, I would really, really appreciate it. Also, if you could turn on post notifications so you could stay up to date and in the know with all the latest Milwaukee Bucks updates and just stay in tune with recent episodes. All right, so getting into everything now, we are going to touch on some news or at least a cool little theory regarding the Detroit Pistons, fellow Eastern Conference team, and now unsuspectingly an up and coming Eastern Conference, what's looking to be a future powerhouse led by the core of Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren, of course, making the playoffs last year for the first time in a good while, and then getting their first postseason win in, I believe, 17 years was their first victory against the Knicks in that first round series. So great for that franchise. But this is having to do with the Milwaukee Bucks because the Detroit Pistons could end up actually being a pretty unsuspecting trade partner for the Milwaukee Bucks, and this has to do with the new situation that has been caused by the Bucks deciding to bring back Thanasis Antetokounmpo on that guaranteed 1 year, $2.9 million deal, and Thanasis now coming back and essentially being guaranteed a spot on the roster. It has caused the Bucks to now have to think about, okay, are we going to cut Andre Jackson Jr.? Are we going to cut a guy like Chris Livingston or Tyler Smith? There's just or Amir Coffey, who's competing for a spot on the roster in training camp. So a lot has now come into question with regard to the Bucks' ability to construct the end of their roster. And while it might not necessarily end up mattering as much over the course of the regular season and into the postseason, again, when these guys specifically most certainly will not touch the floor, or at least most likely, it will mean a good amount, at least for the beginning of this season, and for the Bucks to kind of experiment with their depth and things like that. But anyways, Fansided's this name, I hope I don't butcher the name. Fansided's Swoosh Shrestha. I believe I'm getting that right. A writer about the Detroit Pistons over at Fansided basically came up with the theory, the idea, or the plausibility that the Milwaukee Bucks could eventually contact the Detroit Pistons to work out some sort of a trade to get an extra player or two that they can't have on the roster off of the roster in exchange for either draft capital or a trade exception, which the Detroit Pistons will have one that the Bucks again could be at their disposal because it's just an easy way or easier way to get rid of a player and not have to take a body back. And Shrestha wrote, and I quote, "This latest move to bring back Thanasis Antetokounmpo shows a desire to establish team chemistry rather than any on-court contributions from Thanasis. The Bucks will now have to make moves to ship out a couple players in order to make room for him. The Pistons may actually be in a good position to facilitate such a trade, as they still have a roster spot open and a trade exception. Although I would have liked to see the trade exception used to add immediate young depth at key positions, the inevitable truth is that most trade exceptions end up going unused or are best exchanged for draft compensation. In this case, a young player or draft pick may come back to the Pistons." So, very correct with that assessment right there. That I have never really understood fully the context at which trade exceptions can be mentioned in different trade talks, and when it's actually valuable to mention whether a team has a trade exception to be used or not, because the value of a trade exception is still kind of it's a little bit foggy to me, or at least in certain trade scenarios. But in one like this, it's very clear cut that the Bucks are just looking to get rid of a guy. So you ship him out to a team like the Detroit Pistons, who may be looking to bring on a guy like, let's say, Amir Coffey or Andre Jackson Jr. to kind of round out their bench rotation while also adding a young guy with a decent amount of potential on both ends that could eventually make an impact for their roster. You would just be getting rid of a guy and bringing back money, and that's as simple as it can get with regard to trade exceptions. And it's not impossible to believe that both of these franchises could come together to make a deal happen because they would be pretty perfect partners for, again, for this exact scenario where it's the Bucks just need to get rid of a guy. The Pistons could be looking to, again, let's say bring on a guy like Andre Jackson Jr. to just round out their rotation while also continuing to build onto their young core. They could just experiment with him and see what he has to offer, and it wouldn't be a negative thing. It would be a win-win for both teams. And I figure as though the Detroit Pistons really could be one of the best teams that the Bucks could go to in an effort to just cut down the roster while I guess just having to take on money. While that's not the end result that many people would love out of this situation, that's what it's going to come down to because either you're just letting a guy go for, for nothing at all, or at least you bring in some amount of money that could then be thrown, I don't know, into a future trade with, let's say, a guy like Kyle Kuzma, who we'll get into a little bit later, attached with maybe some other decent young guy and some kind of draft capital. That way, you can make it at least a little bit worth it if you're able to turn that trade exception into a piece of a bigger trade that could be attached with a guy like Kyle Kuzma's salary, let's say. And now, as we're talking about this, we're kind of just going to piggyback off of this topic and talk about Brian Sampson of Forbes. I'm all over the place today. He talked about the Bucks roster crunch that has been created by this whole situation, and he again talked about Andre Jackson Jr., who it looks like out of the couple of guys that are at the core of this problem for the Milwaukee Bucks, or at least the top contenders of who will the Bucks let go. And we talked about this in previous episodes. Talked about that Jaron Jackson or Jaron Jackson all over the place today. Andre Jackson Jr. is probably one of the biggest contenders, if not the biggest, to eventually be traded or waived in the future. And he pointed out that it's due to a couple of factors, and one that was very apparent throughout this past summer league. So Brian Sampson said, and I quote, uh, Andre Jackson Jr. I keep seeing Jaron. I keep seeing Jackson Jr. wanting to say Jaron, but it's Andre. Andre Jackson Jr. Maybe I should refer to him as Ajax from now on, just through the rest of this episode, just so my mind doesn't get boggled up like that. Ajax is one of the most athletic players on the team, but his offensive limitations are glaring. At times, he looks allergic to scoring, even when unguarded, and that right there is what came out to play in summer league, because you would have hoped that, and while I don't mean to go on a complete detour here, you would have hoped that in the summer league this past year, Andre Jackson Jr. would have really established himself as a guy that's been on the NBA team for a couple of years and a guy that other players on the summer league team should kind of defer to, and that he could be a guy that you trust with the ball in his hands to be more of a dominant scorer against summer league competition, and that he can be a dominant offensive player relative to the field of competition that's in front of him with the rest of the summer league. But anyways, Sampson goes on to say that what keeps him relevant is his defense. He might be Milwaukee's best perimeter stopper, capable of guarding multiple positions with his size and quickness. His foul trouble, however, remains a major hurdle. Then goes on to talk about how his contract was partially guaranteed, and now that opens the door for even more speculation and the possibility of an impending move, or his impending wave, or trade. And of course, that just makes this whole situation a lot more real, that the Bucks have likely had internal conversations about Andre Jackson Jr.'s future and what he can really offer to this team in the present moment. And the contract change, making it non-guaranteed until I believe opening night, that just goes to show where their head is at. And it seems as though all this speculation, it's leading somewhere. It's not just baseless, and that Andre Jackson Jr. really may not be a part of the team going into next year. Although he was one of the guys that over the past couple of years I've been the most high on, and that I had a lot of hope for. But as things have started to shake out this way, it's been a little bit disheartening. But there are other guys that kind of stepped up and that may eventually take his place as the unassuming wing that might be able to show something that might not, and that's someone that we'll get into a little bit later. As for this next segment, Sports Illustrated's Chris Mannix came out and said some things about Kyle Kuzma. Nothing necessarily too wild or too disparaging, but basically said that Kyle Kuzma was kind of meh in 33 games with the Bucks. Perhaps a full training camp squeezes more out of him. And what I really wanted to go on to with this topic is that we have to make this issue of Kyle Kuzma not performing up to his standard or up to a standard that we thought that he could perform. We need to make this issue a little bit more highlighted than it is. And while it is getting a lot of coverage, I feel like people don't really understand the gravity of the situation of whether Kyle Kuzma can pick things back up and become a more dominant or at least relied upon or reliable offensive force, because things can change very quick in the NBA, and specifically for a guy like Kyle Kuzma, if he can't pick it up and figure out a way to be effective next to a guy like Giannis and next to Miles Turner and other offensive options like Bobby Portis and a Kevin Porter Jr. and Gary Trent Jr., Kyle Kuzma, I don't think it's insane to say that he may not have a spot in the league if things don't end up, going in a little bit more of a positive direction over the course of the next 2 years or so. Because especially in today's NBA, with the amount of talent that's been coming in the past couple of years, and that the talent in the league just keeps developing at such a rapid pace, it's making an exclusive club of NBA players of about 450 to 500 guys or so that are in the league every year. It's making that exclusive club even more exclusive because these guys just keep getting more skilled overall. And if Kyle Kuzma can't remain an efficient scorer or bring some sort of value to the floor in Milwaukee, there's really a chance that he might not have a spot in the league. And I don't mean to say these things lightly, because Kyle Kuzma is obviously a guy with a lot of talent, a lot of natural gifts and he has potential to have great gifts and or provide great production on both ends of the floor, but it just hasn't come together in Milwaukee. Of course, he only had a half a season, and then the playoff run was just a complete disaster. But if he can't fix it going forward in this next year and leading up to the trade deadline, he may, and I'm not even talking about this from a Bucks perspective necessarily. I'm talking about it from a Kyle Kuzma perspective, that he may play his way out of the NBA and that there may not be a spot for him left on any given team, just because he if he can't be relied upon to score the ball, if he's going to be so on defense throughout the rest of his NBA tenure, then what is a team going to have, or what is a team going to gain by having him come onto their roster and giving him a shot? And the answer is going to be nothing. So don't mean to, and believe me, I hope that Kyle Kuzma can have an amazing comeback season and that he can prove to be the kind of contributor that he was for the 2020 Lakers, because I still do believe that he can get to that level. But as the days go on, and as the days were going on this past season, it seems like it's getting less and less likely, that prospect, that idea of him getting back to 2020 Lakers Kyle Kuzma. But if Kyle Kuzma is on the way out, then I wanted to uh, kind of highlight a guy that might come in, and this was the guy that I was referencing before, that may come in as the Bucks knew, oh, do we have something here? Do we not, kind of wing archetype player after Andre Jackson Jr., and that's Chris Livingston. And of course, we all saw Chris Livingston go nuts in the summer league this past year, coming in with, he was just going straight to the rim, reckless abandon. He obviously played like he had something to prove. That's because he did, and he was able to earn his way back onto the Bucks roster and earn himself another shot. And we have a little bit of an update from Clutch Points Brett Siegel, who's a very reputable source and someone where, if I read his writing or I see a update from him on Twitter/X, I kind of take it to heart and I really put a lot of weight into it. And he was talking about the Bucks conundrum again with bringing in Thanasis and having to kick out one or a couple of guys. And he was bringing up names that he sees as not being, not going anywhere, guys that are probably safe. And of course, a guy like AJ Green, who has proved his value to the Bucks, especially over this past year. And he also lapped Chris Livingston into that kind of conversation. And he said that Livingston just signed a new 1 year deal. Neither player, as in AJ Green or Chris Livingston, neither player is going anywhere. Then goes on to talk about Tyler Smith, who is a guy that in, I believe, the previous episode or the episode before this one, that I really went into the reason why Tyler Smith really could be the guy that ends up getting traded or waived outright. Because it seems if it were to be a conversation or a competition between him and Andre Jackson Jr. to be ultimately the guy that's traded or waived, I feel as though Tyler Smith is the guy that you would waive in that instance, that Andre Jackson Jr. has more trade value, that you can maybe get some kind of second round draft capital out of Andre Jackson Jr., maybe one second round pick. But Tyler Smith, no other prospective team is going to take him on and be willing to offer anything of value up. So Tyler Smith is definitely the guy that would be a wave candidate in that situation. But all of this is to say that Chris Livingston had such an amazing summer league that he, in effect, he made his way back onto the Milwaukee Bucks roster after being released. He got himself another deal, and he's gonna most likely make it through the storm of this final. Oh my gosh, who's gonna be kicked out now that we're bringing back Thanasis? He's likely going to survive this, and that's just how amazing of a summer league he had, averaging I believe north of 20 points a game and just being a pretty efficient shooter from deep and just showing his all around package. And I believe that's a very, very incredible thing that he was able to put forth such an effort that he was not only able to get back on the team, but that he's kind of cast no doubt as to whether he can make it through this situation of who are the Bucks going to kick out to bring back Thanasis. So I just thought that was a pretty interesting thing to report on. But anyways, that'll be it for me today. Thank you very much for tuning in to another episode of Bucks Latest. If you made it this far, I would really appreciate it if you could hit that big red subscribe button down below. Again, still very much on the road to 1,000 subscribers. So if you could hit that button, I'd really appreciate it. All right, I will see you guys in the next one. Go Bucks.